Hello, everyone, and welcome to my first installment in a series of videos that will be covering data analysis and data preparation using R as well as a little bit of Python. So here is a quick summary of what I wanted to cover in this video. So the first thing I want to do is give a full disclaimer, which may actually sound a bit odd, but it is true that I do not know R very well. So when I went to school, I actually went to study psychology, and I didn't really work much with coding languages like R or Python or things like that. If I was running some type of analysis or if I was preparing my data for analysis, I was using probably SPSS or a little bit of Excel. So R and Python are really not part of what I learned as I was going through school. And that kind of gets to my target audience here with these videos. My main audience that I want to teach are those who didn't particularly go to school for programming or computer science, but you still have some type of stats knowledge. So I won't go over the stats, very hardcore depth in this series of videos. I may show a few functions on how to, achieve a few tasks or analyses, but I won't really cover the stats in much depth. So that's who this kind of target audience is for. So maybe someone, similar to my background, if you went to school for something that didn't include computer science or programming, but you do have some stats knowledge, or perhaps now you are starting to, incorporate programming or computer science type programming languages in your work or in your current classes, but it's not something that you're particularly strong in. So that's who this is kind of geared towards. So the next point I want to get at is my general advice for learning or learning how to program any language for the first time. And the first point I have here within that is just do not try to memorize everything that we come across. And I really feel strongly about this just because there's just so many things when it comes to coding and R that you just simply can't commit to memory. There are just literally thousands and thousands of different things to cover. What I do want you to focus more on is just learning the core concepts of R and programming. And these concepts will generalize to other programming and coding languages. So, a short aside, I actually started with R first when I wanted to learn how to program or wanted to do some type of statistical analysis, with some type of scripting language. And I actually had a hard time learning R for the first time, and I quit. I got discouraged and I stopped. But then I actually started learning how to code in Python. And once I learned how to code in Python, I really started to pick up on things that are more generalizable to coding languages in general. So I actually went back to R and I felt like a light bulb switched on my head. Like things finally made sense. And that's because I was finally able to learn those concepts in Python and then bring them to R. Whereas I was took that approach where I mentioned here in A, where I tried to memorize everything in R and it just wasn't working. So with that said, I will focus more, or I will bring the core concepts of coding in R, so you don't have to necessarily learn Python first or another language before we jump into this. But I want to take that learning that I had and hopefully help you all pick up R a little more quickly than I did in my first go around. So. We'll be creating objects and we're learning about indexing and of course obviously a lot of other core concepts. But these are things that I feel like are more important to committing to memory and practicing as opposed to simply trying to memorize every possible thing that we come across. So, and that kind of brings me to my next point here is that every programmer has to do internet searches for key terms or how to do specific things. It's just like I mentioned, even if you are someone who's been in the business or industry or academia for years and you have a good handle of that programming language that you work in, I'm guessing that there's still some things that you have to search for online, and that's okay, and that again, that kind of brings it back to this point here that there's just too many things to be memorized. So everyone has to do searches all the time, how to do things, even if you're experienced in several years. So again, for those learning this programming or R for the first time, just try to focus a little more on the core concepts. Again, these will be covered in these videos. And I really think that'll serve you better as opposed to trying to remember literally everything. All right, so what I want to do next is go into these four basic concepts. So I want to give a quick intro to RStudio, how to set a working directory, and even explain what a working directory is. We'll be reading into data file and then a quick intro into comments. Okay, so this is the basic setup for RStudio, and I will say that I am working on a Windows operating system. Of course, you may be working on a different system, such as a Mac, Apple, or a Linux type operating system, but I will be working out of Windows. And there are some probably minor differences with the operating systems, specifically maybe like a keyboard shortcut. On Windows, we have a Control or Shift, Alt, and Windows key to do things, and perhaps you'll use a different key if you're using a Mac. But I believe for the most part, this is generalizable to the other operating systems. If you're working Windows, or Ubuntu or any other type of Linux or Mac, they're generally the same. So, but this is the setup here. So we have four basic window panes that we're working with. And the first one up here in the left right, I like to think of this as the sandbox or kind of the general drafting area for your code. So this is where a lot of the work is initially done whenever you're trying to figure out how to write the code for a particular task. But once your code is ready to be executed or when you're ready to run it, the code will actually be executed down here in the console. So again, you can kind of think of this area as your drafting area, and then when it's ready, it will actually be run down here. So these are the two windows for that. Over here we have the global environment. So one of the things that you'll see in this window pane are the objects that you create through your script. So things like data sets, um, functions, or any other object that's created in your code. This area will keep those ready for you and just tracked. So just so that you can have a better idea of what's actually being stored in your code. And this will quickly get populated once you start writing code and reading in data sets and doing all kinds of things. This area will be populated quite quickly. So, and then the final window pane here that I won't go into too much detail. You can see that there are a good amount of tabs here, including files, plots. But an important one is the packages, and this video in particular won't go into packages, but I do want to cover that in a future video. So just for now, know that this is an important window if you want to install packages, update them, and all that good stuff. But we'll get into that in future iterations of these videos. Okay, so that is a really high level intro into RStudio. So RStudio is actually what's known as an interactive development environment, an IDE. And this actually isn't at R at its core. So if you were to just work on the simple R program, you'd probably just get something like this, the console area. You wouldn't get an area where you can start scripting or see your environments or see your packages and things like that. It'd be very bare bones down here, something like this. So an IDE like this, an RStudio, really helps you manage your R script in a more friendlier way. And of course, IDEs exist in all types of languages and coding languages, and RStudio just happens to be kind of the IDE that's probably the most popular right now for R. Okay, so Now that we have a quick intro into the RStudio, what I want to do is show you how to set a working directory. So whenever you're working in R, whenever you read in a data file or you output a data file, those will all be read and output to a specific directory or folder that you set. So why don't we go ahead and set that now? So the keyboard shortcut for this is to actually hold the Control and Shift button on your keyboard and then hit H. And then you can see here that we're actually allowed to pick an directory that we want for our working directory. So in this case, I'll just set it to this one. And then you can see here the path that is used for our working directory. And I'll actually save this down here. So when we hit Control Shift H and we clicked on that folder, it actually ran this line here, this line of code. As I mentioned previously, whenever code is ready to be executed, it'll actually be executed down in this console area. But what I want to do is actually store this up here in my little scripting, my little sandbox area, so that whenever I run this file, it will know that datastuff/r is where I want to save my files or I want to read my files from. Okay, so that is a quick intro into setting your working directory. What I want to do next is actually read in a data file into RStudio. So I have a very simple data set here. So you can see that there are 3 columns in this data set. So we have a unique ID, we have a name, and then we have an occupation. So you can think of this first line here as the headers for the data set or the header, singular for the data set, and then the rest of these rows are just various observations in the data. And you can see that the fields or the columns are split by a comma, which is generally known as a comma separated values file or CSV, which is what that stands for. So this can be created very easily, and what I'm using here is what Notepad++. Of course, if you have some type of spreadsheet software like Excel, this can be created very easily as well. So once you have a data set like this, go ahead and name it something. In my case, I just named it example data1.csv. So what we're going to do is just read in this file and save it as an object. And that's what we'll do here. Okay, so what I want to do here is type in what I'll name the object. And in this case, and pretty much any case, whenever you're creating an object, you can name it whatever you want. My general rule or just kind of advice is name it something that's explicit. Even if it's a little longer, uh, something that you can remember or you know exactly what it is for sure is probably more helpful than something that's super short um, and you don't exactly know what it is. But this is what I'm going to be naming my object here, an example data. So if I want to read in the file, what I'll do is I'll do this little arrow kind of symbol here. And you can see that it's actually a less than symbol first, and then a hyphen or a subtraction symbol. And the way you can think of this is that we'll be creating an object, and everything to the right of this arrow is what will be used to create what's to the left. So in a lot of other languages, whenever you're creating an object, you actually use something like one equal sign. So you say example data is going to be this. But the common thing to do in R is to do this arrow or this less than hyphen or less than subtraction symbol here. Okay, so what we'll do next is we'll use a function known as read.csv, and you can see how RStudio is actually kind of helping us autocomplete our function here. I won't get into the details of this right now, but this is what we'll need to read in our CSV. And we'll simply just need the name of it, And as I mentioned previously, I named mine example data 1. If you want to actually get a list of the files that you have in your working directory, you can do something like this. So you can do list files, and then you can see here that it'll give you the name of all of the files you have in your current working directory. So what I want to do is simply copy this and then paste it into here. And we do need that extension, that .csv at the end, and we want to put that whole thing in quotes. So all coding languages are very particular in the way that you enter things. So if you forget the quotes or you forget a symbol here and there, it won't work a lot of times. So you have to be very exact with what you're typing in. But this is basically all we need to create or read in this data set. So we could click run here and it'll run our data. You can also hit Control Enter as a shortcut to run your line. You can also highlight and hit Control Enter. Um, but let's just put the cursor here on line 3 and then hit Control Enter and then see what happens. So you can see here that our code got executed and we didn't see any red text here or any warning messages about any errors, so that's good. We just got some blue text here, which means that it seems like everything went well. So now we officially have a data file that's read into R, and we can actually start viewing it and manipulating it now. So the one thing I do want to show very quickly is how to view the data set within RStudio. So if we actually click on this example data here, you'll see that a new window pops up, this new tab that shows you the name of the columns and as well as some of the values that we have in here. So just a kind of a quick way to visually inspect your data, as I highly recommend for anyone working with data. There's also a lot of cool features within this little window pane whenever you're looking at it. I won't go into too many details, but let's say, for instance, that you wanted to check kind of the minimum or maximum value or something, or if you wanted to sort it, you could simply click on the column and you can see that it's being reordered. So this is what's considered descending order, going from large to small, and then we can click on it again, and then it goes to ascending. And then if we click on these other fields here, you can see that they're actually alphabetized. So they go from A to Z or Z to A, and same with occupation. So kind of a quick way to sort your data within RStudio. Okay, so what I want to say next is when we clicked on this little shortcut here in this window pane, you can actually see that it ran this code. So it actually ran view example.data for us. And as I mentioned previously, whenever code gets executed, it will get executed in this console area. So we can actually just type in view example, and then you can see RStudio is helping us autocomplete, and then it'll achieve the same goal. You can see here that we have a new tab again, and it's opened up with that data that we have. And it is important to note that the view has a capital V here. So if we actually try to use underscore, I'm sorry, not underscore, lowercase v, it will give us an error here. Hey, we don't know what you're trying to tell us with this lowercase view. So I know that's very particular, but if we have a capital V, and then it'll work. So, okay, let's look at where we are here. So we now have done all of these three things. So the next thing I want to close with are comments. So comments are a good way to make notes to not only yourself, but as well as any other collaborator or anyone else who may be viewing your data. And in R, the way to do this is to start with a pound sign, or for you millennials is a hashtag. So if you do hashtag or pound sign, this will actually start a comment. And as I mentioned, it's good to make notes for yourself with comments here. So this will, I'll say something here. This sets the working directory. So again, these are just notes to yourself. And as you're learning how to code and as you're taking notes as you watch these videos, I'd highly encourage you to use comments to yourself. just to help you keep track of what's happening in the code. So the typical norm or the standard is to have one line directly above the code, um, or multiple lines above the code that's being run. But that's typically the norm. Um, but you can actually put this anywhere you'd like. So if you actually want to put a comment over here, you can, to the right or to the left. I mean, probably not the left, is that seems a bit, uh, yeah, that's a bit silly, but we'll put it above. So these comments don't actually affect the way the code runs. It has no bearing at all on what actually gets executed. This is simply just a way to, again, keep notes to yourself and for others. So of course we only have a few lines of code. We only have actually two, but when we have, hundreds or thousands of lines of code, this can get quite unruly if we don't have notes to ourselves or our collaborators on what's happening. So comments are important for that. And they're also, if you want to, for whatever reason, if you have some data that you want to kind of back up um, and run, maybe you want to, let's say, test something. So let's say I want to actually test how to create an object called example data 2, and I don't want to run this code, but I want to still have it there just in case. So that's actually another good use of the comment. So this line won't run now when you execute the code, and this line will because it's not commented. And actually, a shortcut for adding comments to multiple lines is to actually hold, again, this is Windows, but I'm sure it shouldn't be too different for any other operating system, is you do Control Shift C, and then you can see now that all of these lines are commented, and if we want to uncomment them, again, just Control Shift C. All right, great. So that basically concludes my first video. So we did cover a lot of stuff here, covered kind of my background, my general target audience for these videos, also a little bit of advice, and then these quick things into a quick intro into the RStudio, how to set a directory, read a file, and then some comments. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and in the next one, we'll get into some more cool stuff. So hopefully you'll join me for the next one.